Public perspective seems to be a governing force in the identities of society. People with opinions, orientations, or races of the minority tend to feel uncomfortable and not related to. To surpass this, it takes a very specific kind of individual to step outside of the typical area of comfort and create a community for such minorities to turn to. This applies to people who have a strong confidence in themselves and seek to relate to others with similar minds or situations. For example, the African American community in the 1960s had an individual named Martin Luther King, an incredible speaker to say the least. In the example of the gay community in the 1960s to the early 2000s, however, a prominent voice was that of Barbara Gittings, and her vessel was writing. For some background, Barbara was born to Elizabeth and John Gittings in Vienna, Austria, before promptly moving to Wilmington, Washington, USA at the beginning of World War II. Ironically, at the time, she is documented to have wanted to become a nun. As you will see, she was having none of that. Barbara said, quote, "I first heard the word homosexual when rejected for membership to NHS in high school. Even as a Catholic youth with outstanding grades, the lesbian side of her personality was obvious, and she had no way to change it. Eventually, she was admitted to Northwestern University with a major in drama. At this point, her apparently gay psyche was only increasing. She soon resorted to a psychiatrist who diagnosed her with homosexuality and offered to cure her. For those who don't know, the methods to quote-unquote cure homosexuality in the mid-1900s, a then mental illness, were nothing shy of inhumane. Take one of JFK's daughters, Rosemary Kennedy, for example. Born with slight mental impairment, she was eventually subjected to a prefrontal lobotomy, which essentially left her brain dead. Luckily for Barbara, her brain was left very much alive, as her parents opted not to pay for reoccurring psychiatric visits by the logic that a priest could solve any problems that a psychiatrist can. Gittings was forced to avoid contact with her friends in order to lessen the countless lesbian rumors, and she turned to a life of studious loneliness. With no one to speak to about her issues, she turned to literature about homosexuality. She obsessed over the topic, and ended up failing out of school. From what she learned, however, she found that homosexuality is very real, and something that other people experienced. She learned how to fit as best she could, through the written language of pop culture's filter. "I wore drag because I thought it was a way to show I was gay," she said. "I knew high heels and makeup weren't my personal style, so I thought, I must be the other kind." She turned her potential spare time to kinetic collecting of books upon books in the LGBT community. In 1956, she went to visit the office of One Incorporated, an early homophile news press. Side note, homophile is not to be confused with the term pedophile. Homophile, rather, is used by many gay and lesbian individuals to describe their sexuality as primarily love-based, as opposed to the sexual view of homosexual. The focus of One Incorporated was, first, not to upset the mainstream heterosexual society, and second, to cater to their audience. Due to this, Gittings was nearly fired for distributing too much of the magazine. This experience, though, only encouraged her. "I discovered the power of the press, the power to put in what you want in order to influence readers," she said. Her experiences with the magazine led to her many new publication positions of a variety of magazines, all with the intention of providing a community to people like her. She sought controversy and deliberately published articles to start arguments. Come 1965, she took this to the next level by shifting her focus to active protest, including her marching in the first picket lines at the White House, U.S. State Department, and Independence Hall. These protests stood for LGBT inequality of federal government policies on queer-phobic discrimination, as homosexuality was listed as a valid and very legal reason to neglect to hire someone. The marches had all members wear gender-appropriate attire to, quote-unquote, appear employable. Comments such as, "I still don't believe it, somebody's kidding," and "they all look so normal," were made, which were all intended reactions, of course. Barbara said, "I remember a man said to his kids, 'Hold your noses, it's dirty here.' And there was a woman dragging a string of kids who said, very angrily, You should all be married and have children like me. Of course, to anyone interested, descriptive note cards were distributed to show why they were protesting. Violence was never a tactic used in these picket lines. In fact, most people in the lines were scared due to the newness and innovation of the idea of picket lines and gay pride as a whole. In 1967, Barbara drifted onward to a life of making hundreds of appearances as a counselor at hearings, with her lifelong partner Kay Robinson fighting the popular testimony of Dr. Charles Socarides, who stated that homosexuality can easily be converted to heterosexuality and that all homosexuals should be fired for neglecting to choose to be straight. Above helping the community, these hearings took things a step further in its strive for publicity. Now that Gittings had completed her goal of making a community, she desperately wanted to show the world outside of the community that gay, lesbian, and people of the like are all indeed people. To make official status, her next route is quite possibly her most noteworthy. She wanted to prove to non-homosexuals, mind you, that homosexuality is not, in fact, a mental illness. In 1967, she stated in a letter, "I keep trying to convince people in the movement that the charge of sickness is perhaps our greatest problem. We can't really progress in other directions until the unsubstantiated assumption of sickness is demolished." Eventually, after 2 talk show appearances and a showing on the local news, she and her lover took the title for the first open lesbians on US TV. After all this, in 1972, she manages to book a discussion with the American Psychology Association titled Psychiatry, Friend or Foe to Homosexuals, a Dialogue. Immediately, she and Kay protested that there were only heterosexual psychiatrists at the discussion. The panel moderator, Dr. Kent Robinson, agreed to add a gay psychiatrist if we could find one, in 1972 who would come forward. Finally, a gay psychiatrist in Philadelphia agrees under the condition that he dress in heavy disguise with a voice-distorting microphone. Dr. H. Anonymous was his code name. He argued that psychiatry forced him into the closet. After hours of argument and countless displays of evidence, homosexuality is removed from the diagnostic statistical manual used by psychiatrists everywhere. Philadelphia headlines explode with the news, one of which reads, 20 million homosexuals gain instant cure. She spent the following 16 years working in libraries supporting queer literature. And let me tell you, I support queer literature too, Mr. Russell, if you want to give me that, hey, if you know it. As she spent the following 16 years supporting queer literature and removing censorships, she said, "As a teenager, I had to struggle alone to learn about myself and what it meant to be gay. It's hard work, but it's vital, and it's gratifying, and it's often fun." Barbara Gittings died on February 8, 2007 in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, after a long battle with breast cancer. Her legacy to be continued by her partner, Kay Robinson, and queer literature everywhere. She believed in what she felt, despite what people told her, and was able to become an upstanding individual, to say the least. Therefore, I dare to argue, if you, the accumulative you, has an unrepresented opinion in a society with internet and communities where it is so easy to get out there, why not make an attempt at revolution? Why not strive to find others like yourself and create a haven for those who fail to dare, such as you? You live in a world in which a seemingly taboo opinion can force its way through a cryptic press, and yet you don't believe that you can make so much as a dent in the illusion that is America's perfect society? You've got to be kidding me.